The future of America's $37 trillion debt is not a debate between Republicans and Democrats. It's a debate between Bitcoin, gold, and a single piece of legislation nobody is reading. The viral internet theory is seductive. Donald Trump will use a strategic Bitcoin reserve, selling off gold and buying BTC to cut the debt in half. It sounds like a miracle, but that is the lure. What nobody told you is that while the White House debates the fantasy of the $4 trillion Bitcoin fix, the financial establishment is already executing a much more subtle and wicked Cold War strategy. In recent months, a top advisor to Vladimir Putin accused the U.S. of conspiring to move its debt to a crypto cloud and solve it at the expense of the entire world. The theory of a Trump Bitcoin reset is a diversion. The truth is the Genius Act. This act is a precision financial weapon that will not pay off the debt. It will force the world through your favorite stablecoin to finance it. In 2024, the U.S. paid more interest on that debt than it spent on defense and Medicare combined. The crisis is the cost of service, and the solution the Federal Reserve found is to make the rest of the world buy the problem for them. In this video, we are going to dismantle the Trump Bitcoin fantasy and show you how the reverse engineering of the Genius Act works, and why the Russian accusation, even if wrong in detail, hit the bullseye of American strategy. The viral myth, the crypto cloud conspiracy. First, let's address the rumor, the viral theory. It gained traction when Anton Kubiakov, one of Putin's chief economic advisors, publicly stated that the United States was preparing to transfer its $37 trillion national debt to something he called a crypto cloud. The goal? To devalue or make the debt disappear overnight, solving their financial problems at the expense of the entire world. This idea is seductive because it uses the language of complexity. It mixes real terms, stablecoins, digital assets, and blockchain with an entirely invented solution mechanism. It's what I call gilding the pill. Bitcoin guru Michael Saylor added fuel to the fire, proposing that the U.S. should sell its gold reserves and buy Bitcoin to recapitalize the country. Viral media took these two narratives and fused them. The U.S. would execute a complete debt reset using crypto. As we've seen, there is no financial mechanism, no crypto cloud where you can upload debt to make it magically disappear. American debt is composed mostly of treasury bills, T-bills, notes, and bonds. These are legal contracts with real consequences. You cannot simply convert a T-bond into Bitcoin or a stablecoin as if it were a currency exchange. However, Kubiakov's accusation is a smoke signal that points to the real mechanism. He hit the target by saying the U.S. is trying to solve its debt problem at the expense of the entire world. But the trick is not to erase the debt. It is to ensure the world continues to finance it, and crucially, that the cost of inflation is distributed globally. And for that, they needed a precision weapon, stablecoins. The real crisis, why the Fed needs a global pipeline. To understand their financial warfare strategy, we need to understand the gravity of the debt crisis, which is not the debt itself, but its maintenance. The American Treasury owes over $37 trillion. That's already an absurd number, but what is truly scaring Wall Street and the Federal Reserve is the speed with which the cost of interest is growing. In 2024, the annual interest payment on that debt exceeded, for the first time in history, what the U.S. spends on defense and Medicare combined. Think about that. The country is spending more to roll over its debt than to care for its elderly and defend its borders. This is what economists call the debt doom loop, or vicious debt cycle. If confidence in the U.S.'s ability to pay its debt decreases, creditors demand higher interest rates. Higher rates mean higher debt service costs. Higher debt service costs mean bigger deficits. Bigger deficits mean more borrowing. And so this cycle self-reinforces, potentially leading to a crisis of confidence and ultimately a collapse. To break this cycle, the U.S. has two options. Number one, cut spending. Politically impossible and unpopular. Number two, find new buyers. Create an artificial, continuous demand for U.S. Treasury bills to keep rates low and confidence high. Historically, the largest buyers of U.S. bonds were foreign nations like China and Japan. However, the phenomenon of de-dollarization, countries selling their dollar assets and seeking alternatives like gold or trade in local currencies, is undermining that buyer base. The U.S. needed a new mechanism, a pipeline that could channel global demand back to its debt. They found it in the crypto sector, specifically in stablecoins. The Genius Act. This is the crucial point. The Genius Act, the full name, although not always used, refers to the legislation addressing regulatory clarity for digital assets, particularly stablecoins. Before this legislation, stablecoins like Tether USDT and Circle USDC could back their tokens with a variety of assets: cash, commercial paper, and yes, US Treasury bonds. The Genius Act, however, mandates or at least strongly incentivizes that dollar-backed stablecoins, especially the largest ones, be backed primarily by cash or short-term treasury bills, T-bills. This is the most wicked chess move. 1. The creation of mandatory buyers. The Genius Act has turned stablecoin issuing companies, Tether and Circle, into mandatory and institutionalized buyers of American debt. These companies are already among the largest holders of treasury bills outside of central banks. With every new digital dollar issued, every time a global investor decides to use a stablecoin to trade or flee an unstable local currency, that new dollar must be backed. And that backing, by law or strong incentive, translates into a new purchase of American debt. 2. The global pipeline. The Genius Act bypasses government-led de-dollarization. If China or Japan sell treasury bills, the Federal Reserve simply channels the demand from millions of individual users in emerging economies, Africa, Latin America, and Asia, through stablecoins to offset that sale. The money of an individual investor in Lagos or Buenos Aires who is trying to preserve their capital from local hyperinflation is now being forced to finance the American fiscal deficit. 3. The exportation of inflation. If the debt is financed by continuous money printing, i.e. more T-bill issuance and the Fed monetizing that debt, the result is inflation. Inflation is, in essence, a devaluation of the currency. If the dollar's value falls, whoever holds that dollar or an asset backed by it absorbs the loss. Previously, this loss of purchasing power primarily hit Americans. Now, anyone in the world who holds a dollar-backed stablecoin, due to the Genius Act, is being silently hit by American inflation. Therefore, Russia was right. The U.S. is solving its problems at the expense of the entire world, not by erasing the debt, but by forcing the world to finance it and absorb the cost of the resulting inflation more efficiently than ever before. The stablecoin is its Trojan horse. If you value this kind of deep financial insight, I invite you to hit the subscribe button and like this video. Stay vigilant so you don't get caught off guard by this and many other financial Trojan horses. Debunking the solution fantasies. The fantasies about what the U.S. should do to solve the debt popularized by figures like Michael Saylor distract attention from this real maneuver. Let's debunk the top 3. Fantasy 1. The Michael Saylor and Trump plan. Sell the gold and buy Bitcoin. Michael Saylor, the visionary behind MicroStrategy, now just strategy, advocates that the U.S. should sell its gold reserves and use the capital to buy Bitcoin to create strategic Bitcoin reserve. He argues that Bitcoin is the manifest destiny for the U.S. in the 21st century and that a reserve of 1 million Bitcoin, about 5% of the global supply, maintained for 20 years, could, with expected appreciation, cut the national debt in half. Senator Loomis has publicly defended this view, and it is widely associated with Trump's financial proposals. The reality? While Trump did sign an executive order in 2025 to create the strategic Bitcoin reserve and digital asset stockpile, this reserve is primarily made up of Bitcoin already confiscated from criminals. The order specifically prohibits the sale of this Bitcoin and is not a program to sell gold or spend taxpayer money on a Bitcoin buying spree. The idea of replacing the gold reserve with a volatile asset like Bitcoin or financing the entire debt with speculative appreciation is not a government plan, it is a bold investment proposal.
Fantasy 2. The $4 trillion gold option. Revaluation. There is another financial reset tactic circulating in monetary policy circles. Gold revaluation. The U.S. holds 261 million troy ounces of gold. On the balance sheet, this gold is still valued at an unrealistic historical price. If the government decided to revalue the gold at the current market price or at a speculative target price, like $15,000 per ounce, it could potentially generate $4 trillion in instant capital without needing congressional approval. The reality, this is a real but risky plan to generate capital, not to erase the debt. Generating $4 trillion without legislative approval would certainly help pay the debt service, but it would be seen by many as a desperate accounting trick, weakening the dollar's credibility in spooking market. Fantasy 3. The secret crypto stack. The theory that the U.S. is using private companies, such as MicroStrategy, as a backdoor to secretly build a national Bitcoin reserve behind the scenes. The reality, while the government may historically have worked with private companies in secret, like the government's stake in Intel recently, there is no concrete evidence of this with Bitcoin. The fact that a company like MicroStrategy buys Bitcoin is a legal corporate decision. It does not imply that the government is pulling the strings. It is pure speculation. All of these theories, sell gold, secret stack, crypto cloud, have one thing in common. They are clever, complex, and use real terminology, but they fail the test of logic and viability. They try to solve a $37 trillion problem with a story, not a solid financial plan. The Federal Reserve's real strategy, the oldest trick in the book, upgraded. If the fantasy is not the answer and the visionary Bitcoin solution is not the real plan, then what is the Federal Reserve's long-term strategy for managing a $37 trillion debt? The real plan is, as it always has been, much less dramatic, but much more important. 1. Print and inflate. The U.S. manages its debt the oldest way. It issues more bonds and, when necessary, inject more money into the economy using inflation to slowly reduce the real value, the purchasing power of what it owes. 2. Maintain reserve status. The trick works because the U.S. dollar is still the world's reserve currency. Global demand is guaranteed because oil, most commodities, and the majority of global trade are conducted in dollars. 3. Upgrade the exportation. The Genius Act. Stablecoins, USDC, and Tether are digital, but they are backed by short-term treasury bills, U.S. debt. The more people who use these stablecoins globally, the greater the artificial demand for American debt. And when inflation, the trick from the book, is triggered, the cost of that loss of purchasing power is efficiently spread worldwide to all holders of digital dollars. The final point, the Federal Reserve's plan is not a conspiracy to erase the debt. It is a financial warfare strategy to ensure the world continues financing the debt and pays the costs of the American inflation. The stablecoin is the channel to export it most efficiently. It is the way to ensure that the dollar's status as a global reserve, however threatened by de-dollarization, is extended to the maximum, making individual users in the crypto market help maintain demand for treasury bills that central banks are selling. Conclusion: what to do now? So, what is your takeaway? The viral theory that the U.S. will erase $37 trillion with crypto is pure fantasy. But the strategy of using stablecoin legislation, the Genius Act, to force global demand for American debt and thus export the cost of inflation and the burden of interest to crypto users worldwide is real and already fully underway. It is the most sophisticated way the American financial empire has found to extend its monetary dominance while trying to avoid the debt doom loop. Complexity in this case does not mean the conspiracy is true. It means the maneuver of the financial establishment is so subtle and ingenious that it only makes sense when you debunk the reset narrative and focus on the reality of the debt exportation pipeline. If you want to know how to protect yourself from this global export of inflation and understand how Bitcoin, which is a brute force digital energy network, fits into this scenario of dollar devaluation, I invite you to watch this video and learn the real story of Bitcoin. If you want to understand how to prepare for these financial issues, subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. And tell me in the comments, what is your view on the collapse of the dollar? Do you believe the Genius Act is a weapon? See you soon.